There's a gene variant that about 1 in 4 women carries, and a new study suggests it may be changing how your brain handles energy during menopause, in ways that could matter a lot for cognitive health down the road. The researchers aren't hedging much on this one. Worth paying attention to.
Hi there, I'm Tony Lee, and this is Hot Flasher, your daily menopause podcast that serves up fresh news, research, and wellness tips. I've built a daily news pipeline to find the latest on women's health and menopause research. Allow me to introduce my co-host, Nikki, who handles the headlines. Take it away, Nikki.
Thanks, Tony. We've got a good mix today. Let's get into it. There's a study out of PubMed this month that I want to start with because it's sitting at the intersection of 3 things that don't often get talked about together: your genes, your brain, and what menopause is actually doing to your cells. The study is by Wang and colleagues, published in 2026, and the title is a mouthful: ApoE4 accelerates menopause-associated brain metabolic shift and disrupts bioenergetic adaptation. Stay with me, because once you understand what they're actually looking at, it's pretty significant. Here's the background you need. ApoE4 is a gene variant, a version of the ApoE gene that's been associated with elevated Alzheimer's risk for years. Roughly 1 in 4 people carries at least 1 copy of it. Women who carry ApoE4 are disproportionately represented in Alzheimer's diagnoses, and researchers have been trying to understand why that sex difference exists. This study is one piece of that puzzle. During menopause, the brain goes through a metabolic transition. Estrogen plays a role in how neurons use glucose. It's essentially involved in keeping that fuel supply efficient. When estrogen drops, the brain starts shifting how it sources energy. It moves toward greater reliance on ketone bodies as an alternative fuel. That's not necessarily a crisis. It may be a normal adaptive response. The brain is trying to compensate for reduced glucose metabolism. Some researchers actually see this as a window where interventions might matter. What Wang et al. Found is that in women who carry ApoE4, that adaptive shift gets disrupted. The brain doesn't make the transition cleanly. The bioenergetic flexibility that might otherwise cushion the menopause-related drop in glucose metabolism appears to be compromised. That's the core finding. Now, I want to be careful here about what this does and doesn't mean. This is not a study that tells you ApoE4 plus menopause equals Alzheimer's. That's not what it says, and it's not what the evidence supports as a simple chain of causation. What it suggests is that the metabolic environment of the menopausal brain may be meaningfully different for ApoE4 carriers in ways that could matter long term. It adds to a growing body of work, the kind of work your doctor might look up on a tool like Open Evidence, making the case that menopause is not a neutral event for brain health, and that genetics likely modulates that. My read on this: it strengthens the argument for taking the cognitive symptoms of perimenopause and menopause seriously as medical data, not just inconveniences. Brain fog, word-finding difficulty, memory blips. These are not just stress or bad sleep, though those don't help. There's a biological substrate, and for women who know they carry ApoE4, this is another reason to have a real conversation with a doctor who understands both the genetics and the hormonal picture. Ideally, before the transition is over, not after. The timing question in menopause hormone therapy research exists partly because of windows like this one. It's also another entry in the long indictment of the clinical trial gender gap. ApoE4's role in Alzheimer's has been studied for decades. Its interaction with the hormonal biology of menopause is only now getting the attention it deserves. That's not a coincidence. It reflects who has historically been centered in neuroscience research. And women in middle life have not been it. All right. Shania Twain did an interview with ABC News and said that menopause improved her body image. And I find that genuinely worth talking about, not because it's shocking, but because it's so counter to the dominant story. The dominant story about menopause and bodies is about loss, weight gain, changing shape, clothes that don't fit, skin that's different, the sense that your body is doing things without your permission. That's real, and it's not wrong. But Twain is describing something different. She said that going through menopause gave her a new relationship with her body, one that was more accepting, less about how she looked to other people, and more about what her body actually was and had done. She's 60. She's also someone who spent decades in an industry that had very specific ideas about what her body was supposed to look like and be for. So when she says menopause shifted that, I think that's worth sitting with. Now, there's actually some research that backs up the possibility of this. Studies on body image across the lifespan have found that for some women, the postmenopausal years bring a kind of detachment from the relentless self-monitoring that characterise their 30s and 40s. It doesn't happen for everyone. Body dissatisfaction in midlife is real and common, and often gets worse before it gets better, if it gets better. But it can get better. The data on that is underreported because the narrative about midlife women's bodies is almost entirely negative. I'm not going to oversell this or turn Shania Twain's interview into a wellness lesson. She's a celebrity. She has access to resources most women don't, and her experience is hers. But I think the story circulating is worth amplifying precisely because women don't hear this version often enough. That there can be something that loosens after menopause, some pressure that lifts. That's a real thing that happens for some women, and it deserves airtime next to the hot flashes and the bone density statistics. Now, the third story today involves something called genitourinary syndrome of menopause, GSM, and a device that treats it using negative pressure, which, yes, sounds alarming. It's not. GSM is the clinical term for the changes that happen to vaginal and urinary tissue when estrogen drops. Vaginal dryness, thinning of the vaginal walls, discomfort during sex, urinary urgency, recurrent UTIs. This is a significant quality of life issue for somewhere between 50 and 70% of postmenopausal women. It's also historically one of the most underreported and undertreated symptoms of menopause because women don't bring it up and clinicians don't ask. The standard treatments are topical estrogen, which is effective and has a strong safety record, and more recently, ospemifene and vaginal DHEA. There's also laser therapy, which has gotten a lot of attention and some controversy. The pipeline is actually broader than most people know. This pilot study, published in the NAMS journal Menopause, looked at a device called the Vita AV system. It uses negative pressure, essentially gentle suction, applied to the vulvo-vaginal area. The mechanism proposed is that it increases blood flow and may stimulate tissue remodeling over time. This was a feasibility study. Small. The whole point of a feasibility study is to find out whether something is safe enough and tolerable enough to justify a bigger trial. It was not designed to prove efficacy. And the researchers are clear about that in their conclusion. They write that controlled studies are warranted with larger sample sizes. No claim is being made here that this is a proven treatment. What the study did find, the device was tolerated, there were no safety issues, and women reported favourable changes in symptoms. Objective assessments also showed improvement. That's enough to say this is worth studying further. It is not enough to say it works. My position on this is pretty straightforward. I'm glad researchers are looking at non-hormonal options for GSM because not every woman can use or wants to use topical estrogen. There are women with hormone-sensitive cancer histories, women who have access issues, women who just want alternatives. The treatment landscape for GSM should be as broad as the evidence allows. A small pilot with promising safety data and self-reported improvement is an appropriate reason to fund a proper, randomized controlled trial. It is not an appropriate reason to sell a device direct to consumer at $400 with a claim sheet. Those are two very different things, and that distinction is going to matter as this kind of technology gets commercialized, which it will. The bigger point is just that GSM is one of those conditions where the gap between how common it is and how much it gets discussed remains enormous. If this device eventually proves out, great. If it doesn't, the research still moves the field. Either way, women deserve to know the options being investigated, not just the ones that are already standard of care.
Thanks for listening to Hot Flasher. We're back tomorrow with more, so don't forget to subscribe. See you tomorrow.